choose what you want to contemplate rather than being at the effect of the negative critic that's always inside your head saying, you're not good enough, you screwed this up, you're going to fail. We all have that voice, but the question is, number one, do we listen to it? And number two, can we quiet it? And my dream is that we all start to notice the filters that we place and the labels we place on ourselves and others. Then number two, once we realize those labels, choose different ones that empower us about ourselves and one another. And then three, the goal, enlightenment, is to live a no-filter life.
Yeah, I think that also that taking a deep breath and being able to kind of override the amygdala's initial fight, flight, or freeze reaction is really important for like leaders in the work world when they're dealing with firefighting or other issues or all the stresses that come with running a business. Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human, because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Jennifer Cahill. Jennifer is an entrepreneur, executive coach, and speaker with over 20 years of experience. She exited her first company in 2018. As a recognized expert, she's appeared on KNX Radio, BBC News, ABC, NBC, Fox, and E! News, and quoted in The Ladders and Glassdoor. In 2021, she co-founded OptiMatch, an algorithm revolutionizing human connections in business by matching people using motivating factors. A member of the Evolutionary Leader Circle, Hill has hosted a 17-part series with Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman entitled Conversations at the Intersection of Cutting-Edge Science and Spirituality, which can be found on Humanity Stream. She also hosts a podcast called Regarding Consciousness. Congrats on OptiMatch and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thank you so much, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show because I think you, with the work you've done in OptiMatch and talking with the 17-part series and that stuff, I think you're a great person to talk about just the better understanding of what is human connection and how it actually works. And by doing so, people can, I think, be more mindful about how they go about connecting with people once they understand exactly how it works. So I'd love to hear more about your take on that.
Yeah, it's a funny story. For me, when I was a little girl, Carl, it was like you got a book and he and she got books on how to be human. And when I opened mine, it was blank. And that led to decades of broken relationships, misunderstandings, and heartbreak for me and for those in my life. So I've made it my life's work for the last 20 years studying how to be human. What are humans? Why are they these strange creatures that say one thing and do another thing? And my entire life's work has been studying different disciplines, principles. I have 183 tools I use to understand myself and the world. And then because I get bored easily, I developed my own tool, which is OptiMatch, in order to better understand how myself and others are motivated. Essentially, when I meet people, Carl, I like to calculate in my brain how people are motivated. And it served me very well in building the first company, which was in the recruiting space. And after I sold it, my co-founder, who recently passed away, had a genius idea. And he said, Jen, why don't we just create an algorithm that mirrors your intuition for, matching people? And I said, shit, you're a genius, Jules. And he was. So his legacy lives on in the company we created.
That's awesome. And so what is it? What are some of the, I know we can't go over all like 189 you said, but what are some of the main things you think that are the most important for people to understand about it when it comes to human connection?
What I really teach people is something called the golden triangle of connection, Carl, and that is deep intimacy and self-awareness allows for deep intimacy and understanding of others, which allows for deep intimacy and focus on purpose and creating meaningful purpose in your life. So the question, of course, I always get asked is how? How do we understand ourselves, Jen? Everybody's sitting there scratching their heads saying, like, I don't understand my kids. I don't understand myself, my spouse. I always recommend that people spend time in introspection. I recently wrote an article about proactive versus reactive contemplation. I write a weekly LinkedIn newsletter called Inspired Living Tools. And in this article, I was talking to one of my coaching clients. Basically what happens is I get inspired in real time by calls I'm on And this coaching client and I were lamenting the fact that he sometimes would get on the hamster wheel in his head. You know where you ruminate, Carl, and you just get stuck on a thought like, this person hates me, I'm going to get fired, I have no money, whatever it is. We get stuck on the hamster wheel of thought. That's what I call reactive contemplation. Proactive contemplation is where you set aside time every morning, evening, even just start with 5 minutes a day, and you reflect on how you could be a better person. You reflect on what are your shortcomings. You reflect on what are the things that make you an asset as a business partner, as a parent, as a romantic partner. So I have a particular tool. It's one of my favorites. Every night before I go to bed, I call it spiritual accounting. I talked about it in one of the recent books I wrote, 101 Spiritual Tools for Uncertain Times. And spiritual accounting goes something like this. You basically reflect right as you're about to step into bed, Carl. You write down, I write it on my iPhone, you can write it on a notepad or whatever you have near your bed, and you write down, how could I have lived today better? In other words, was I rude? Was I unkind? Did I not work out and I intended to? You're the only one. Nobody else is ever going to see this list. And then you immediately follow that up with, what are you proud of yourself for? Maybe you walked the dog an extra time, or maybe you picked up the kids without your spouse having to ask. Maybe something nobody else will ever personally thank you for. Maybe you just didn't have that last bite of carrot cake that was really good, right? And you write that down and you acknowledge and appreciate yourself. And then the final thing is to reflect on what's at least 3 things you're grateful for. What are 3 things that you appreciated about your day? I often, having been in third world countries and having the privilege and honor of building schools there and being in places with no running water, no beds, no electricity, none of that, sometimes I'll be going to bed and I'll say, oh my God, I'm warm. I have a bed. I have clean air. Little things that we might take for granted. Even just being able to have a blanket covering you, whatever it is that you can draw your appreciation to before you go to bed can really reset how you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, I love that suggestion, that making that a habit, because I think it's something that it ties into a larger theme of, I think one of the keys to success in life today is taking time to slow down, because there's so many things trying to get us to go faster and faster and faster, and our brains aren't wired to move that fast, and we don't have these kind of pull off to the side of the road and be introspective, especially in the proactive approach you had instead of just in the reactive one. It really gives you time to work through your experiences and your thoughts and your feelings, and again, with the goal of being more connected with yourself. And I really like how you explain how that ties into the golden triangle. And it's something that I've noticed as I've been talking with people on the show, previous episodes, is that just that need to slow down and to be more connected with yourself and more mindful, and not be constantly rushing and distracted and always on, because it's something that is not, you just can't keep that pace up without suffering from a lot of the issues that people are struggling with these days when it comes to mental health and emotional health and bad relationships, because we need that moment of calm and introspection and analysis of ourselves and how we want to be in order to actually gain control of the direction we're in.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And that's my intention, whether I'm appearing on a podcast like this or teaching a class or working with a coaching client, is to put the reins of your consciousness back into your own hands. You referenced the series I did with Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman, which of course was an honor and a privilege, and really taught me a lot about neuroscience and quantum physics and stuff I had never studied in school, although ironically, Don Hoffman was my favorite professor at UC Irvine where I went. So it was very serendipitous that our paths realigned here. We were 20 years later that I got to do this series with him. That said, we don't realize that our brains, our consciousness, are like these wild Clydesdale horses that are running amok, right? They're running right, they're running left, they're running off the side of a cliff. And most of us don't know how to put the reins of our consciousness back into our own hands. So one of the other big things that I teach people, Carl, is tools for self-regulation. Even in that moment, you might notice if you go back and listen, or if anybody listens, I just noticed I can't tend to be very animated when I speak. But if I want the message to land for you, I need to regulate my nervous system in real time. So I just allowed a slow, deep breath. And that then regulated my nervous system and noticed my energy just calm down. So I've learned that when you can quiet the amygdala, that part of your brain that's the fight, freeze, flee, right? Then you can regain access to your prefrontal cortex and you can proactively choose what you want to think about, choose what you want to contemplate, rather than being at the effect of the negative critic that's always inside your head saying, you're not good enough, you screwed this up, you're going to fail. We all have that voice, but the question is, number one, do we listen to it? And number two, can we quiet it? And my dream is that we all start to notice the filters that we place and the labels we place on ourselves and others. Then number two, once we've realized those labels, choose different ones that empower us about ourselves and one another. And then three, the goal, enlightenment, is to live a no filter life.
Yeah, I think that also that taking a deep breath and being able to kind of override the amygdala's initial fight, flight, or freeze reaction is really important for like leaders in the work world when they're dealing with firefighting or other issues or all the stresses that come with running a business. If you're not able to take a deep breath and communicate with that control and hold the reins when you're working with your team, then you're very often going to be lashing out or saying things that damage the relationships with direct prospects and going to impact the entire company because you're not actually in control of what you're saying or what you're doing. You're kind of letting the amygdala run wild, and it has radically bad repercussions on the success of a business and also just the success of any sort of relationships, personal, professional, and with yourself, because there's going to be that, hopefully, that sense of regret if you realize you lashed out at someone that wasn't warranted. So I can see how, as you're talking, I'm seeing all the little kind of connective tissues where this simple act of, even like you said, the evening exercise of being mindful and getting more connected with yourself and having more hold on the reins of what your brain is doing is, the root to solving a lot of the challenges people have with connection and relationships.
Yeah, it begins with the self. So often we want to point fingers at one another. And one of my other favorite techniques is inner child work. It's one of the things that I work with every coaching client on. I often teach it when I'm facilitating classes. I wrote an article about how it's the inner child in the boardroom, I think was the name of the article, if anybody wants to find it. And it's that, they're not 40-year-olds or 50 or 60-year-olds in the boardroom making decisions about companies or countries. They're little upset 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds having tantrums because we've never dealt with our own pain. So that's part of my morning practice as well, is every day I'll check in. I'll say, my love, how are you feeling? Sweetheart, what do you need? I ask myself every day, what do you need? What are you feeling? And that allows me to show up clean, because if I don't address my own needs, and some of them are subconscious, I'm shocked some of the time, Carl, I'll put my hand on my heart, my left hand on my abdomen, and I'll just say, hey, my love, hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling right now? And I kid you not, Carl, sometimes she'll say, I'm sad or I'm angry. And I'm like, shit, who are we sad and angry about? This is hilarious, right? So when you start to understand all of this, then you begin to be radically accountable, and you're putting the reins of your consciousness and awareness back into your own hands.
Yeah, and it's something that I think that in general, taking that pause to, okay, how am I feeling? And then why am I feeling the way I'm feeling is something that I found a lot of value in, because it's when you, and I know I know my body when I've learned how to listen to my body over the years. And so, and same thing with my emotions. Like I always feel that kind of sense of pride when I and I catch myself feeling a certain way, and then I'm able to stop and analyze it and then work through it instead of just letting it flow, because it is easy just to kind of get swept up in an emotional state and not be accountable for it and think that, oh, it's just how I'm feeling, there's nothing I can do. But when in reality, if you're mindful and actually listen and work through those feelings, you can understand the patterns and understand what the triggering mechanisms are, and then respond instead of react. And I think that's a big indicator of kind of emotional maturity, and someone to differentiate a good leader from a bad one is someone who has the ability to respond versus react to their emotions.
Absolutely, 100%. It's like, can you just pause in that moment? Allow, one of my teachers taught me to allow a breath rather than take a breath, because when we take a breath, we go, and when we allow a breath, it's more expansive. So in the moment, can we allow a breath and bring our presence to the moment?
And so, yeah, I like the simple change of word there is very powerful. And I'm reflecting on what we've been talking about. I noticed you mentioned a number of books that you've written or kind of and been involved with. And before we recorded, you mentioned you have a new one coming out with an awesome title. So I'd love to make sure we get a chance to connect on that, and tell me more about this book you got coming up.
Yeah, so people know me as a spiritual woman who spends 2 hours a day in prayer and meditation and reflection, but there's a little secret. I'm a bit of a recovering asshole. So that's the secret, and that's the name of the book, is The Recovering Asshole. I even have a prayer that people love. I had never shared it really, aside from friends. Anytime I shared it with friends, colleagues, coaching clients, people loved it. And I also call that the anti-asshole prayer. So if anybody goes to antiassholeprayer.com, you'll be able to you'll give you a link to sign up, and you'll get that with some of my other favorite morning mantras and affirmations. So in the Recovering Asshole book, I share about my journey. I want to give people hope, Carl. Like, if I can go, people are like, how big of a jerk were you? I'm like, big, huge, like immeasurable. And so that's why the book is coming out next year, is so people can hopefully learn from my faux pas, and have a few laughs at my expense, and learn something along the way, because we all have a little bit of a jerk inside of us. In fact, one of my favorite keynotes I give is how to deal with an office a-hole. And the opening of that is, did you know that 1 in every 3 people is an asshole? That means if you look to your left, and if you look to your right, and if you don't see an asshole sitting nearby you, that asshole might be you, and you might not even know it. I know I certainly didn't. So that was one of my favorite talks I gave for years.
It's a great opening. And yeah, I think they're one of my big core beliefs is that in finding a balance point on between all things, and it's not about always being in balance, but I think there's a healthy amount of, and so like kind of kindness versus kind of the assholetry, for like, you don't want to be like too on one end of the spectrum or another, but there's a healthy middle point somewhere, always not in the center, but sometimes along that spectrum. And I think it's you need some of that what might be considered a-hole behavior to advocate for yourself and make sure you're not being walked on by people. We don't overdo it and become too much, too selfish. And so I think it's one of those things that you finding the right middle ground, the right balance for you, and it might change depending on the situation, is important. But I think so often, especially in the society today, where people are quick to jump to extremes on things and think that, and to kind of make thinking simplified and not have to spend as much effort like analyzing a situation, but that when you say everyone has a bit of an asshole in them, yes, I think that's just because part of humanity is having those tendencies. But if you're, like we've been talking about, being aware of who you are and your tendencies and your emotions, you can find the right amount of those characteristics or that behavior that allows you to stand up for yourself and not be walked over without going too overboard into kind of full asshole territory. But it's about finding that balance that works for you and the situation you're in. And I think it's important that it's like we've been talking about, the kind of the emotional control, that people are aware of how they're showing up or how they're being perceived by other people, and are listening to what other people are telling them, because that helps them get a more accurate understanding of their behavior and how it's being received by other people. Because like all communication, just because you think you're communicating in one way doesn't mean it's being received the way you're expecting it to. And what really matters is how it's being received. And so I'm definitely want to check out the link and to check out this book, because I think it's something that I think will help people find that healthy middle spot in their own behavioral spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can go to antiassholeprayer.com and you'll be given a chance to sign up. You'll get the mantras that I use, including the anti-asshole prayer. It'll give you a heads up when the book comes out. And it's funny because part of what you're talking about, people who have what I call porous boundaries, healthy boundaries, and rigid boundaries, and that actually ties into the 8 types of assholes that I discuss, is that there are 8 types of assholes, and you actually have the gossip. Some people don't realize that's a way of being a jerk too. If you're gossipy, that means you might have too porous of boundaries and you're sharing too much. If you're more the Machiavellian or the yeller, you might have too rigid boundaries. So there's a whole asshole matrix I work with to help people understand what sort of asshole are you. In fact, I'm even debating possibly putting together a quiz for people, since we've already created the algorithm for OptiMatch. I'm like, this might be a fun little ChatGPT thing to come up with people to accompany the book.
Well, I am definitely looking forward to checking out the book and the quiz and any other content you put out regarding this topic and others. So thank you so much for connecting with me today, Jennifer. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please like, leave a review, and share it. If you want to connect with Jennifer or myself, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.